Daniel Reed's heart thudded in his chest as the glow of his desk lamp illuminated the crumpled piece of paper he had just retrieved. He sat alone in the dimly lit security room of Area 51, the humming of machinery in the background offering little comfort. The note had arrived earlier, unmarked and unsigned, with only a cryptic message that had caused Daniel's pulse to spike. They don't want you to know, but I will tell you the truth about Jake's death. Area 51 isn't what you think it is. Jake, Daniel's older brother, a man who had always been his protector, his guide, until that day, years ago, when Jake had died in a mysterious plane crash. A crash that was ruled an accident, but one that Daniel had never fully believed. There was something off about the whole situation. Now, this letter, this eerie message, opened a door in Daniel's mind he had never been ready to explore. The implications were clear. Jake's death had not been a tragic accident. It had been something much darker. Something that tied back to the place where Daniel had spent his adult life working. The very place where he had once blindly believed in the security and secrecy that surrounded the US government. Daniel leaned back in his chair, staring at the note, its words echoing in his mind. The letter had mentioned Area 51, the place he had sworn to protect and monitor. But had the government really been hiding the truth from the public for all these years? More importantly, had they been hiding something from him? Something tied to his brother's untimely death? The shadows of the base outside his window grew longer as nightfall began to creep in. His mind raced, knowing he could not just ignore the message. But the more he thought about it, the more questions emerged. Why would someone from the inside want to tell him the truth now? Was it a trap? Or was this person genuinely trying to expose something so dangerous it had to be kept in the deepest corners of secrecy? Daniel couldn't ignore it. He had to find out what had really happened to Jake, and if it meant uncovering the truth behind Area 51's darkest secrets, then so be it. The next morning, he pulled on his jacket and left the security room. He'd spent years walking the halls of this base, patrolling the perimeter and for the Stender, making sure no one got in or out without permission. But now he had to look closer, deeper into the very walls that had once protected him. He headed for the restricted section of the base where all sensitive materials were stored, hoping to find anything, any clue, that could help him understand what had happened to Jake. As Daniel approached the vault-like door to the archives, the guard gave him a weary look but didn't question him. After all, he had worked here for over a decade. He wasn't just another guard, he was part of the system. But this time, the system wasn't his ally. It was the very system that had kept the truth from him. Inside the archive room, dusty files and documents lined the shelves, some marked with thick black lines across their pages. The smell of old paper filled the air as Daniel sifted through the folders, his fingers trembling as he reached for the one labeled Experiment Log Temporal Studies. He'd never heard of this particular file. As he flipped it open, his eyes widened. The first page contained details about tests conducted with extraterrestrial artifacts. The next pages described experiments that blurred the lines between time and space, and near the end of the log, Daniel found a shocking mention: Jake Reed, Experiment 427. Daniel's stomach twisted in a knot. The name he had always loved and respected now lay under a dark shadow, connected to something far more sinister than he had ever imagined. He quickly turned the pages, his mind racing. Jake had been part of these experiments. The experiments that weren't just about studying alien technology, but about manipulating time itself. The page described a portal, an artificial gateway to another dimension, created using alien tech. It detailed how these gateways could be used to travel between dimensions and time periods. But the experiment had gone wrong. Jake had been part of the test, and something had happened to him during the experiment. He was lost. Daniel slammed the file shut, a wave of nausea sweeping over him. His brother wasn't just dead. He was lost, trapped in a dimension that he couldn't return from. He had been part of an experiment that had gone terribly wrong, an experiment that the government had worked to cover up. Suddenly, Daniel heard footsteps approaching. He snapped the file closed and quickly shoved it into his bag, his heart pounding as he turned to leave. But as he reached the door, the voice of his superior, General Walker, echoed down the hallway. "Reed," the general called, his voice sharp and commanding. Daniel froze. He turned, forcing a calm expression onto his face. "Sir?" he responded, trying to hide the panic rising in his chest. General Walker walked toward him, his expression unreadable. "I need you in the main control room. There's been a breach. We have unauthorized personnel accessing the mainframe. I don't need to tell you how serious this is." Daniel's mind raced. A breach. The timing was too perfect. Too suspicious. This wasn't just a coincidence. His heart beat faster as he realized the full scope of what he had uncovered. There was someone else, someone inside the facility, who knew about Jake, and they were trying to shut down whatever information he had just discovered. "Understood, sir," Daniel replied, his voice steady despite the storm brewing inside him. He followed General Walker, knowing that his next steps could lead him to the most dangerous path he had ever walked. The truth about Jake was out there. But now it seemed the whole base was set on stopping him from uncovering it. The forces at play were far more powerful than he could have imagined, and they would do anything to keep their dark secrets hidden. As Daniel stepped into the control room, the screens flickered to life. He could feel the weight of the room, the eyes of everyone around him focused on the monitors. But in his mind, he wasn't looking at the screens. He was thinking about the truth he had uncovered and the road ahead, one that led into the heart of darkness where answers about his brother's death and the true nature of Area 51 lay waiting to be discovered. But it was a road that would come at a price he wasn't sure he was ready to pay. Daniel Reed's mind raced as he sat in the dimly lit control room, his hands clenched into fists on the table. General Walker had left him alone to process the situation, but the air in the room felt like it was pressing in on him, suffocating him with the weight of his discoveries. The screen in front of him flashed with images of security footage, showing various parts of the base, but his thoughts were far from the cameras and monitors. His brother, Jake, he had been part of an experiment that was not just dangerous, but world-altering. The experiment had involved manipulating time itself, and now Daniel was left holding the pieces of a shattered truth. How could he have been so blind all these years? How could the man he had trusted most in his life have been involved in something so extraordinary? The sudden ping of his communication device broke his thoughts. It was a message from an unknown source, encrypted with a series of codes he couldn't quite understand. He hesitated for a moment, his fingers hovering over the screen, before deciding to open it. The message was short, yet chilling. "I know what you've uncovered, Daniel. Don't trust anyone. Meet me at the hangar. Midnight. Alone." His breath caught in his throat. Who could this be? Someone who knew about the experiment? Someone who was trying to stop him from going further? Or was this an ally? Someone who had the answers to the questions Daniel couldn't even put into words? He had no choice. He couldn't ignore this message. Not now. Not after everything he had already uncovered. Daniel left the control room, careful not to draw attention to his departure. He moved quickly through the narrow hallways of Area 51, past locked doors and security checkpoints. His heart pounded in his chest with every step he took. The base was massive, one of the most secure places on Earth, yet tonight it felt like a labyrinth of shadows. Every turn could be another trap, another hidden secret he wasn't prepared for. As he neared the hangar, the sound of his footsteps echoed in the silent halls. He checked his watch. It was almost midnight. He couldn't help but feel a rush of dread mixed with adrenaline. What if this meeting was a trap? What if the people who had kept the secrets about Jake's death were waiting for him, ready to silence him for good? The hangar loomed ahead, dark and foreboding. It was one of the oldest parts of the facility, often used for storage or, in more recent years, for testing experimental aircraft. As Daniel approached the entrance, he noticed the faintest flicker of movement in the shadows. A figure emerged from the darkness, a man in a long coat, his face obscured by the low light. Daniel's breath caught. This was it, the moment he had been both dreading and anticipating. He stepped forward, his body tense, ready for anything. "You're Daniel Reed?" The man's voice was low and gravelly, a whisper carried by the wind. Daniel nodded, his voice tight with uncertainty. "Who are you?" The man took a step closer, and as he did, the faintest gleam of recognition flashed in his eyes. "I've been keeping an eye on you, Daniel. I knew you'd get here eventually. I'm someone who wants to help you. But you have to listen carefully. What you've uncovered isn't just about your brother, it's about something much bigger, something that could change everything we know. Daniel felt the weight of the words pressing down on him. What do you mean? What happened to Jake? The man sighed, his breath visible in the cool night air. Your brother didn't just die in an accident. He wasn't just a casualty of an experiment gone wrong. He was part of something much more dangerous than you could ever imagine, something that the government has been hiding for decades. Daniel's mind was spinning. What is it? What are you talking about? The man took another step forward, his face finally coming into view. Daniel's stomach churned as he recognized the man, Dr. Elias Vance, a former scientist who had worked at Area 51 before disappearing under mysterious circumstances years ago. He had been rumored to have known too much about the secret projects that were being carried out at the base, and now here he was, standing in front of Daniel like a ghost from the past. I was part of the team that conducted those experiments, Dr. Vance said, his voice barely above a whisper. Jake, he was chosen because of his genetic makeup. He was a perfect candidate. They didn't just use alien technology in their experiments, they used the very fabric of time itself. They thought they could control it, manipulate it, but something went wrong and Jake, he was lost in the process. Daniel's mind reeled. You're telling me that Jake, my brother, was sent into another dimension? Into another time? Dr. Vance nodded slowly. Yes, and worse, the experiment didn't just affect Jake, it affected the timeline. Time, as we know it, is unstable. What they did was like cracking a mirror, shattering it into millions of pieces, and now those pieces are beginning to fall apart. The weight of the information was overwhelming. What do you want me to do? Dr. Vance stepped closer, his voice growing more urgent. I can help you find your brother, Daniel, but you need to understand the stakes. There are people, powerful people, who will stop at nothing to keep this secret hidden. They will kill to protect it. But the truth is, it's already too late. The damage has been done, and now we have to fix it before the whole fabric of reality unravels. Daniel's heart raced. The room seemed to spin as he tried to make sense of everything. His brother had been lost in time, part of an experiment that had disturbed the very nature of the universe. And now the entire world was at risk of falling apart. How do we fix it? Daniel's voice was barely a whisper. Dr. Vance looked at him, his expression grave. We need to access the original device, the portal. It's still hidden here at the base. If we can reach it, we might be able to reverse the damage. But we don't have much time. If the people who've been covering this up find out you're involved, they'll come after you too, and they won't stop until you're gone. Daniel's chest tightened. He had never felt more terrified in his life, but he couldn't back down now. He had to find his brother. He had to finish what Jake had started. We'll do it, Daniel said, his voice steady despite the fear gnawing at him. Where do we start? Dr. Vance's eyes flickered with a hint of relief. Follow me. The truth is closer than you think. And with that, they disappeared into the shadows of the hangar toward a future neither of them could fully comprehend. The only thing Daniel knew for certain was that the journey ahead would lead him into the heart of darkness, and it would be a fight for survival, not just for him, but for the very fabric of reality itself. Daniel's heart raced as he followed Dr. Vance through the darkened corridors of Area 51. The weight of the mission pressed down on him, and the quiet urgency in Vance's movements only heightened his anxiety. Every footstep echoed through the maze-like hallways, each one seemingly carrying them deeper into the unknown. The silence was oppressive, and the cold air of the underground base seemed to grow heavier with each passing moment. Is this it? Daniel asked, his voice barely a whisper as they approached a sealed door, hidden behind layers of security. It was reinforced with thick metal, the kind of door only accessible to the highest-ranking personnel within the facility. Dr. Vance didn't respond immediately, his fingers flying across the control panel in a practiced motion. The digital lock buzzed, and the heavy door groaned as it slowly slid open. This is where it began, Vance said, stepping aside to allow Daniel inside. This is the heart of the experiment. The room beyond was vast and sterile, its walls lined with consoles, blinking monitors, and strange, otherworldly equipment that hummed with energy. At the center of it all stood a massive machine, its metallic surface reflecting the dim light in an eerie glow. It resembled a combination of an ancient relic and cutting-edge technology, a hybrid of what humanity had yet to understand. Daniel stepped forward, mesmerized by the machine. "What is this?" he asked, his voice trembling. He couldn't help but feel a deep sense of dread wash over him. This device, this portal, was more than just a scientific instrument. It was the source of all the chaos. Dr. Vance turned toward him, his expression grave. This is what they used to manipulate time. They called it the temporal disruptor. It was supposed to be a controlled experiment, a way to explore alternate timelines, different realities, to test how far we could stretch the fabric of time itself. But in the process, they cracked it wide open. What happened to Jake? It wasn't supposed to happen. Daniel's mind raced, trying to make sense of the disaster that had unfolded. The temporal disruptor, a machine designed to alter time itself, had led to his brother's disappearance and caused a rift in reality. It had unleashed forces that were far beyond human comprehension. "Is there any chance we can reverse it?" Daniel asked, a sense of hopelessness creeping into his voice. Dr. Vance nodded slowly, his face drawn with concern. "Maybe, but it won't be easy. The machine has been malfunctioning for years. And what's worse, the distortion it caused has begun to bleed into our reality. Other worlds, other timelines, they're starting to invade. What you see in front of you is just the beginning." As if on cue, the lights flickered, casting long shadows across the room. The air grew cold, and a strange humming noise vibrated through the floor. Daniel's blood ran cold as the walls seemed to distort, rippling like the surface of water disturbed by a stone. The temporal disruptor crackled to life, the machine's core glowing with a bright, sickly light. And then, it happened. A tear in the fabric of reality itself appeared in the air, shimmering like a mirage. It was a doorway, a portal to another world. The edges of the rift warped and twisted, showing glimpses of landscapes that defied all logic. Alien skies, cities that floated in the air, creatures unlike anything Daniel had ever seen. "What the hell is that?" Daniel asked, his voice trembling as he took a step back, instinctively reaching for the weapon at his side. Dr. Vance's face went pale. "It's happening faster than I thought. The portal isn't just a one-way passage. It's starting to leak into our world. Those things, those realities, they're coming through." Before Daniel could respond, the air around them seemed to warp. Figures began to materialize from the rift. Tall, humanoid beings with glowing eyes, their bodies rippling with strange energy. They looked like something out of a nightmare, their forms constantly shifting and distorting as though they couldn't decide what they were. "Get down!" Dr. Vance shouted, pushing Daniel behind a console. The figures stepped through the portal, their movements unsettlingly fluid. One of them reached out, its elongated fingers brushing the air, and the entire room seemed to vibrate with an otherworldly hum. Daniel's mind reeled. Were these creatures the result of the experiment? Were they the inhabitants of another timeline, another dimension? And how were they able to pass through the rift? The machine hummed louder, and the portal widened further, its edges glowing brighter. It was as if the very essence of reality was being consumed by the tear, and Daniel could feel the weight of the collapse pressing in on him. "We need to shut it down!" Daniel yelled, his voice barely audible over the rising noise. Vance shook his head. "It's too late. We can't close it now. The damage is done. But there's still a chance to fix this. We have to stop the portal from expanding. If it gets any bigger, these beings won't just invade, they'll take over." The figures continued to step through, each one more monstrous than the last, their forms flickering and distorting with every movement. Daniel could feel the very air around him pulse with a strange energy, as if the laws of physics themselves were beginning to bend under the pressure. "We have to get to the core of the machine," Vance said urgently, pulling Daniel towards the control panel. "That's the only way to reverse the damage." But just as they reached the console, the room shook violently. The walls cracked and the lights flickered out, plunging them into darkness. The only illumination came from the shimmering rift and the glowing forms that were beginning to fill the room. Daniel felt the ground tremble beneath his feet, and a feeling of cold dread washed over him. They were running out of time. The portal was destabilizing faster than they could control it. With no other choice, Daniel and Vance rushed toward the heart of the machine, determined to stop the invasion of another reality before it consumed their own. But with every passing second, the situation grew more desperate. The rift was widening, and the creatures from the other side were closing in, their eyes glowing with a hunger that seemed to pierce through the very fabric of existence. And somewhere deep within the chaos, Daniel realized the terrifying truth: the battle for their reality was just beginning. The room pulsed with a sense of foreboding as the energy from the temporal disruptor crackled through the air. Daniel's heart thudded in his chest, and his mind raced with the terrifying possibilities of what they were facing. The rift, now nearly twice its original size, hung like a jagged tear in the fabric of reality itself. Through it, the grotesque figures from the other world continued to slip into their own, their movements chaotic and unpredictable. "Do you see it, Daniel?" Dr. Vance's voice was a strained whisper. He stood at the edge of the console, his hand hovering over the controls, but his gaze was locked on the rift. His face had gone pale, his usual calm demeanor shattered by the enormity of what they were witnessing. Daniel nodded, his eyes still fixed on the otherworldly shapes that now populated the room. The creatures, if that's what they were, didn't walk or move in any way that made sense to the human eye. Their forms flickered, split, and rejoined, as if reality itself was unsure how to contain them, and their eyes, glowing with an unnatural light, seemed to pierce through the very core of Daniel's being. "They're coming through faster," Daniel muttered, his voice tight with fear. He could feel the ground beneath his feet tremble, the walls shaking violently as the rift expanded. But there was something else now, a subtle hum that vibrated through his entire body. It was as if the very molecules in the air were beginning to twist under the influence of the creatures that had crossed over. Dr. Vance's expression hardened. "It's not just that. The portal is shifting. This isn't just an invasion. The rift is bleeding energy into our world. It's mutating everything it touches, warping our reality. What we're seeing is the product of their experiments." Daniel's stomach churned as he realized what Vance meant. These creatures weren't just random invaders from another dimension. They were the result of experiments, horrific trials that had gone far beyond human comprehension. And now those experiments were spilling into their world, reshaping it in ways that could destroy everything they knew. "Tell me more," Daniel demanded, his voice raw with urgency. "What exactly happened here? What did they do?" Vance glanced around the room, his eyes flickering with a mix of regret and fear. The temporal disruptor wasn't always like this. When it was first constructed, it was supposed to be a scientific tool, an attempt to observe and study alternate realities. But somewhere along the way, they stopped being content with simply observing. He paused, his face clouded with the weight of the truth. They started experimenting with manipulation. They didn't just want to watch other worlds, they wanted to control them. They wanted to draw energy from these realities, to harvest it and use it to fuel their own. But every experiment created more instability. Every breach tore a deeper rift, and every rift invited more and more of these things. Daniel's blood ran cold as the full scope of the disaster sank in. The temporal disruptor, device meant for scientific exploration, had become a weapon, a bridge that connected their world to others, but also a door that let through whatever creatures and forces those worlds had to offer. "You mean to tell me they were using this to pull energy from other realities? To harvest power from them?" Daniel's voice trembled with disbelief. He could barely wrap his mind around the enormity of what Vance was saying. "Yes," Vance replied, his voice grave. "And the worst part is that they were using living beings in their experiments. They brought them in, not as subjects, but as tools. They experimented on them, altered them, and used them to draw power from other timelines." Suddenly, the room seemed to grow colder, and Daniel felt a sharp sting in his chest as a chill ran through his body. A distant, echoing sound grew louder, the unmistakable noise of something approaching from the rift. "They didn't just experiment with energy," Vance continued, barely hearing Daniel's thoughts. "They experimented with life itself. These creatures, they were once human. They were brought here from alternate timelines, different versions of Earth. Some of them were living beings, human beings. But the experiments changed them. They twisted their bodies and minds, turning them into these abominations. They weren't supposed to survive the process, but some did. They adapted, and now they've found a way to cross into our reality. Daniel's mind reeled with horror as he tried to process what Vance was saying. These creatures, these monstrous figures that had emerged from the rift, had once been human. They were the product of twisted experiments, drawn from alternate realities and subjected to unspeakable horrors. And now they were free to invade their world and bring about a new era of destruction. Suddenly, the air shifted, and the temperature in the room plummeted. Daniel's breath came out in visible clouds, and the humming noise grew louder. He turned to see one of the creatures step forward, its form more solid than before, its eyes glowing with an intensity that was almost maddening. It was taller now, more defined, its humanoid shape no longer flickering like a distorted hologram. "I've seen this before," Vance said softly, his voice tinged with a deep sadness. They have memories, fragments of their old selves, and they know what happened to them. They remember being human. Daniel stared at the creature, feeling a wave of pity and disgust clash within him. It had once been like him, alive, human, with hopes and dreams. But now it was little more than a twisted shadow of what it had been, a shell of a person consumed by the madness of the experiment. "Can we stop this?" Daniel asked, his voice barely a whisper. "Can we undo what's been done?" Dr. Vance shook his head slowly. "I don't know. I don't know if we can fix what's been broken. The portal is too unstable, and the energy is spreading. It's altering the very nature of reality. These creatures are the beginning. If we don't stop the rift from expanding, there will be no stopping what comes next. The experiments, they were just the first step. What they're really after is complete domination. They want to take our world and use it as a conduit to invade every reality." Daniel's blood ran cold as the weight of Vance's words sank in. The creatures were just the beginning. If they didn't act fast, their world would be nothing more than another victim of the temporal disruptor's twisted experiments. "We need to stop this, Vance," Daniel said, his voice steady with determination. "We have to shut down the machine before it's too late." Vance turned toward him, his face lined with worry. "But we can't do it alone. The only way to close the rift is to destroy the source, the temporal disruptor itself. But the cost could be more than we're willing to pay." As the rift crackled behind them, Daniel made up his mind. There was no other choice. He had to destroy the temporal disruptor. The fate of their world, and every other world connected to it, depended on it. And he would not let this nightmare spread any further. The lab was eerily quiet, the faint hum of machinery a constant reminder of the disaster unfolding beyond the walls. Daniel stood before the massive screen that displayed the rift in all its chaotic glory. The rift pulsed like an open wound in the very fabric of reality, flickering with dark, distorted images from alternate dimensions. As terrifying as it was, the rift was also a symbol of the twisted brilliance that had led to its creation. The brilliance that Daniel had once admired, but now cursed. Dr. Vance sat at a console, his fingers tracing over the keys with a mechanical precision. His face was pale, the dark circles beneath his eyes a sign of sleepless nights spent trying to control the situation. His mind, once sharp and clear, seemed clouded by the burden of guilt and regret. "We don't have much time," Vance muttered, not looking up from the screen. "The rift is expanding faster than anticipated. If we don't act within the next 24 hours, the consequences will be catastrophic." Daniel felt a surge of panic at the words, but he quickly masked it with resolve. "What's the plan, Vance? We can't just sit here and watch it grow. We need to act now." Vance finally looked up, his eyes haunted. "I've been working on a countermeasure, a fail-safe, if you will. But it's not going to be easy, Daniel, and it requires shutting down the temporal disruptor completely, and that means taking it offline for good." Daniel frowned, his mind racing. "We've tried that before. We couldn't even get close to the core without triggering the security systems." "I know," Vance replied, his voice tinged with frustration. "But this time, we have something the others didn't. Knowledge of how the system works. We understand its weaknesses now, and I think I've found a way to bypass the security protocols." Daniel's gaze hardened. "How?" Vance's fingers flew over the console, pulling up a series of encrypted schematics. The glowing screen flickered briefly as it displayed the heart of the temporal disruptor, the central core that powered the rift. It was a massive, complex machine designed to manipulate the very fabric of time and space, a machine that had now become a deadly threat to their world. "We're going to infiltrate the core," Vance said, his voice steady despite the gravity of the situation. "I've found a back door, a vulnerable spot in the system's defenses. If we can get inside, we can disable the temporal disruptor from within. But it's a one-way trip. Once we initiate the shutdown, there's no turning back." Daniel nodded slowly, absorbing the information. "What's the catch?" "The catch," Vance replied, "is that the rift is connected to the core in ways we still don't fully understand. If we disconnect it, there's no telling what will happen. The rift could collapse, or it could destabilize even further. We could be dealing with a full-scale dimensional implosion." Daniel's stomach twisted. The stakes were higher than he had ever imagined. But there was no other option. If they didn't shut down the temporal disruptor, the rift would keep growing, and the creatures would continue pouring through, transforming everything in their wake. "I'm in," Daniel said, his voice unwavering. "Tell me what I need to do." Vance hesitated, his eyes narrowing as he assessed Daniel. "I'll need a team. The core is heavily guarded, and we'll need to neutralize any security before we can even get close. I've already called in a few favors, but it'll be dangerous. The creatures are already spilling into the facility, and we have no idea how far the contamination has spread." "Where do we start?" Daniel asked, his mind already planning. Vance looked at him with a mixture of caution and resolve. "We'll start by accessing the security control room. If we can take it offline, we'll have a better shot at getting to the core undetected. I'll need you to handle the physical security. Your skills in combat will be invaluable. I'll work on disabling the core's defenses." Daniel clenched his fists. "And if we fail?" Vance didn't answer immediately, his expression grim. "Then we all die. This is our only shot." The weight of his words hung heavy in the air, but Daniel refused to let it break him. The alternative was too horrifying to consider. The rift, the creatures, the experiments, it all had to stop. For humanity, for their world. "We'll make it work," Daniel said, determination fueling his every word. "We'll shut this down no matter what it takes." Vance nodded, his gaze hardening. "I hope you're right, because if we fail, there will be no second chances." The team assembled in the darkened corridor, the air thick with tension. Daniel, Vance, and a handful of trusted operatives were ready to move. Each person was equipped with high-tech gear designed for a mission of this magnitude. Stealth suits, weapons capable of disabling the creatures, and devices for hacking into the security systems. The room buzzed with an eerie quietness, each member lost in their thoughts, knowing that what they were about to do would either save or destroy their world. "Are we ready?" Daniel asked, his voice calm but urgent. "Ready as we'll ever be," Vance replied, adjusting the display on his wrist. "We have a narrow window before the rift destabilizes beyond our control. We need to move quickly." With a final glance at one another, they set off down the dark, winding halls of the facility, moving like shadows. The faint echoes of their footsteps were the only sound in the otherwise silent corridors. But even as they moved swiftly, Daniel couldn't shake the feeling that they were walking toward their own doom. The facility had once been a place of discovery, a beacon of scientific advancement. Now it was a tomb, a husk of its former self, filled with the echoes of twisted experiments and the haunting cries of creatures born from other worlds. As they reached the entrance to the security control room, Daniel's pulse quickened. Vance quickly accessed the terminal, his fingers flying over the keys. The holographic display flickered and buzzed as it processed the security overrides. "We're in," Vance said, his voice barely audible. "Let's move." The doors to the control room slid open, and the team filed inside. They had no time to waste. The core was waiting, and the fate of their world rested in their hands. The countdown had begun. The corridor seemed to stretch endlessly before them, a dark, foreboding tunnel leading straight into the heart of the facility. Daniel's pulse raced as the metallic walls closed in around him. Each step felt heavier than the last, his boots echoing through the silence like a countdown to their inevitable confrontation. The air was thick with the acrid scent of ozone and machinery, mingling with the faintest hint of something unnatural. The rift was still growing, pulsating like a heartbeat just beyond the walls, an ominous reminder of what lay ahead. The security room door slid open with a hiss, revealing a stark, cold room lit only by the flickering light of the monitors that lined every surface. The screens were filled with images, some static, some in motion, showing the chaos unfolding across the facility. Creatures, twisted and grotesque, wandered the halls, their eyes glinting with malevolent intelligence. They were hunting. But it wasn't just the creatures that Daniel feared. It was the growing sense that they weren't alone. The rift had drawn something far worse, something beyond even his worst nightmares. Something waiting in the shadows, waiting for them to open the door. Vance moved quickly to the central console, fingers dancing across the holographic display, his brow furrowed in concentration. I've initiated the override sequence. We've got 2 minutes before the failsafe is engaged. Once we disable the security system, we can move through the corridors without worrying about automated defenses. But those creatures, they're a different problem entirely. Daniel's hand gripped the hilt of his weapon, a sleek, blackened rifle designed to incapacitate rather than kill. They had no choice but to move fast. "What's the plan?" he asked, his voice a low growl. "We're going to open the core," Vance replied, his voice tinged with a mixture of dread and resolve. "We'll use the security access point to trigger the primary gate. It's the only way to gain access to the temporal disruptor's core. Once it's open, the failsafe will prevent any further outside interference, but it will also send a signal that will be felt across all dimensions." Daniel's heart skipped a beat. "You're telling me that once we open the gate, we'll be sending a signal straight to the heart of the rift?" "Exactly," Vance said, his voice cold, detached. "And we have no idea what that signal will bring back. We've only seen glimpses of what's on the other side, but that's nothing compared to the truth." Daniel's mind raced. The creatures, what they had been calling infiltrators, were only the beginning. They were the first wave, an advance force sent to scout Earth. But the rift was a doorway, a gateway between worlds. And what lay beyond that gateway could very well be the end of everything. "Then we'd better move quickly," Daniel said, his voice grim. "Let's get the gate open." Vance nodded, his fingers moving swiftly as he navigated through the security systems. The door to the control room hissed open with a soft, unsettling sound, revealing a narrow hallway that stretched into darkness. The rift was close now. Its presence felt like a heavy weight pressing on their chests. It had been growing since the first breach, the distortions in the fabric of reality more pronounced, more violent. Daniel's team followed in tight formation, weapons ready, nerves on edge. The walls of the facility felt alive with the hum of machinery, but there was something else, the faint scratching sounds, the whispered voices in the dark. They were being watched. But by whom? A flash of movement at the far end of the hallway. Daniel's heart leapt into his throat as a shadow darted across the corridor. His rifle snapped up instinctively, but it was gone before he could get a shot off. His mind screamed at him to focus, to stay calm, but the ever-growing sense of danger gnawed at him. "Keep moving," Daniel ordered, voice steady. "We don't have time for this." The group pressed forward, moving cautiously. The hum of the facility seemed to grow louder with each step, vibrating in the air, until it was a constant background noise. Vance led the way, his hands gripping the console as he typed in a final command. The gate ahead of them began to shift, the metal panels groaning as they moved, revealing the large spherical chamber beyond. The temporal disruptor's core was housed within, a monolithic structure bathed in unnatural light. The moment the gate fully opened, the air seemed to vibrate, a low-frequency hum that reverberated deep within their bones. For a second, everything seemed to freeze. The rift on the far side of the facility pulsed again, stronger this time, as if it were reaching out, calling something from beyond. The team stood still, waiting for the inevitable. "Get ready," Vance whispered, his voice barely audible over the hum of the rift. "Once we engage the core, the signal will go out. We're not just opening the gate, we're inviting whatever is on the other side to come through." Daniel nodded, his jaw set in determination. They had no choice now. It was either shut down the temporal disruptor or let the rift tear apart their world. "We'll hold the line," he said, his voice hard. "We'll do whatever it takes." The core's massive doors opened fully with a sound that was a cross between the scream of metal and the rumble of distant thunder. The light inside was blinding, a kaleidoscope of color that seemed to twist and bend in ways that defied logic. The energy flowing from the rift surged as the doors slid open, feeding into the core and sending waves of power radiating through the facility. Daniel's heart pounded in his chest as he watched the swirling vortex of light and energy in the center of the room. It was beautiful, terrifying, and alien all at once. The ground beneath his feet trembled as if the very foundation of the building was shifting, reacting to the power of the rift. "Move!" Daniel shouted, pulling his team into position as the hum of the facility reached a crescendo. The creatures had heard the signal. They were coming. From every direction, the doorways behind them exploded open with a deafening roar, revealing the first wave of enemies. Horrible, twisted beings, half human, half something else, rushed into the room, their eyes glowing with malice. Their mouths were filled with sharp, jagged teeth, and their bodies were unnaturally long, stretching and contorting as they moved. "We can't hold them off," one of Daniel's team members yelled as they opened fire, their weapons sending powerful bursts of energy into the oncoming swarm. "Don't let them reach the core," Daniel shouted, aiming his weapon at the nearest creature and firing. The blast tore through the creature's chest, but it didn't stop. It didn't even slow down. They were relentless. And then, just as they had feared, the rift pulsed once more, stronger, brighter, and the gateway was open wider than ever. The creatures were only the first wave. What came next was going to change everything. The battle raged on, the sound of gunfire and screams filling the once silent hallways of the facility. Daniel and his team were locked in a desperate struggle for survival, surrounded by the nightmarish creatures that had poured through the rift. Their grotesque forms seemed to melt into the darkness, eyes glowing with malevolent intent. Each movement was unnatural, predatory. There was no mercy in them. "Keep pushing," Daniel shouted, his voice hoarse as he fired his rifle into the horde. The blast tore through the air, each shot landing with devastating force. But for every creature that fell, another one seemed to take its place. The sheer volume of them was overwhelming. The corridor, once a pristine structure of technology, had become a battleground littered with the twisted bodies of both man and beast. Vance stood beside Daniel, his hands moving frantically across the console as he tried to stabilize the core's defenses. "The temporal disruptor is unstable," he yelled over the cacophony. "We need to stabilize it before it's too late, or we'll lose everything." Daniel gritted his teeth. "Do what you can. We're not letting this place fall." The core was glowing brighter now, its light pulsing in rhythmic bursts that made the entire facility shudder. With every wave of energy, the creatures seemed to grow more aggressive, more numerous. The rift was feeding them, growing them stronger by the second. But they weren't just enemies. They were invaders sent by something far beyond Earth, drawn to the signal that the temporal disruptor had sent out. They had only one goal: to take the planet. Daniel and his team fought valiantly, their weapons blazing, but the creatures were relentless. Daniel's mind raced as he tried to form a plan, anything to turn the tide of battle. But each new wave of attackers seemed to be more ferocious than the last. "Get to the core," Daniel ordered. "We need to shut this down before they break through." His team moved in unison, charging toward the center of the room where the temporal disruptor's heart pulsed with terrifying energy. The rift loomed behind them, a swirling mass of color and light, and beyond it, they knew, lay the true enemy, the force that had created these horrors. As they moved, the creatures closed in, blocking their path. Daniel's rifle roared to life, sending blast after blast into the horde, but it felt like a never-ending tide. "We won't make it if we don't find a way to stop them," one of his soldiers shouted. Vance's voice crackled through the comms. "I've got a lockdown on the core. I can't guarantee how long it'll hold, but it should slow them down." Daniel's heart pounded in his chest. They had to buy time. "Fall back," he barked. "We hold them off here. Give Vance the chance to finish the sequence." The team quickly retreated to a more defensible position, positioning themselves between the invaders and the core. The creatures hissed and screeched, their eyes burning with rage as they advanced. Their movements were fluid, like predators stalking their prey, but there was something disturbingly human about the way they moved, something that made Daniel feel like they were being watched by something far more intelligent than mere beasts. "Hold your ground," Daniel shouted, his voice ringing out over the chaos. "Don't let them through." The battle became a blur. The sound of weapons discharging, the screams of his team, the alien growls, it all melded together into a cacophony of survival. But through it all, one thing was clear. They were outnumbered, and every second counted. One of the creatures lunged at Daniel, its jagged teeth snapping. Without hesitation, he ducked under its reach and fired point blank into its chest. The creature collapsed, but Daniel barely had time to register the kill before another one surged forward. "Reload," his team shouted as they fought side by side, each of them pushing back against the unrelenting tide of invaders. Daniel's hands were slick with sweat, his heart hammering in his chest. They were losing ground. The rift behind them pulsed again, brighter this time. Daniel turned just in time to see a shadow move across it, a figure far larger than anything they'd faced before. It was as though the rift itself had begun to manifest something more tangible. A being, far more powerful, was crossing over. "Fall back," Daniel yelled. "Get to the core now." But even as they moved, it felt like they were too late. The shadow in the rift grew larger, the creature stepping through in a massive, terrifying form that cast a long, dark shadow across the room. It was humanoid, but its features were warped and grotesque, covered in armor-like plating that seemed to shimmer with energy. Its eyes glowed with an unnatural, pulsating light, and the air around it seemed to ripple with power. "We have to stop it!" Daniel shouted, desperation rising in his chest. Vance's voice cut through the panic. "I'm almost there, just hold on a little longer." Daniel had no choice but to focus on the immediate threat. He aimed his rifle at the massive creature, firing everything he had. The shots hit, but the creature barely flinched. It was too powerful. "We can't kill it," one of his team members shouted. "We need to focus on the rift." Daniel knew they had no choice. Forget the creature. Take out the rift. If we can close it, the creature will have nowhere to go. The team switched tactics, turning their weapons on the rift, firing everything they had at the swirling portal. The shots connected, sending sparks flying, but the rift resisted, its edges rippling as though mocking their efforts. The massive invader took another step forward, its hand outstretched, a dark energy crackling at its fingertips. "It's too strong," Daniel said, his voice grim. "We're out of options." Vance's voice came through the comms again, this time with a tone of finality. "It's done. The sequence is complete. I've locked the rift. There's no going back now." Daniel didn't have time to react. The invader's hand struck, sending a wave of dark energy crashing toward them. Everything went white. For a moment, there was nothing but light. And then, as quickly as it had come, it faded. When Daniel's vision cleared, he found himself standing on the other side, the battlefield gone, the invader vanquished. But the rift still pulsed in the distance, and the feeling of something worse lurking just beyond it remained. They had survived the battle, but they knew this was only the beginning. The invaders were here to stay, and humanity was on the verge of something far greater and far darker than they could have imagined. The war had just begun. The world was never the same after that day. The battle had ended, but the scars, both visible and invisible, remained. Daniel stood at the edge of the facility, overlooking the shattered landscape that had once been a beacon of technological progress. The sky above, once bright with the warmth of a peaceful world, was now darkened by the looming presence of the rift. It was no longer just a crack in reality, it had become a gateway, a portal to the unknown. The invaders had been pushed back, but their presence lingered, their threat not fully extinguished. The team had retreated to a temporary base, a hidden underground facility that had once been used for research purposes. The atmosphere was heavy, the air thick with tension. The world outside might have seemed like it had returned to normal, but the reality was far different. The rift was still there, pulsing like a living thing, its energy seeping into the very fabric of the earth itself. Daniel ran his hand through his hair, exhaustion weighing down his every movement. He had seen too much, experienced too much. The creatures, the invasion, the sheer scale of what had happened. It was all beyond anything he could have imagined. But through it all, one thing had become clear. Humanity had changed. The world had changed, and so had they. "You look like you've seen a ghost." Vance's voice cut through his thoughts, pulling him back to the present. The scientist was standing just behind him, arms crossed, his face tight with exhaustion. Daniel shook his head, turning to face him. I can't stop thinking about the rift. It's not just a doorway, it's a beacon. The invaders were drawn to it, but who else might be able to hear it? Who else is out there? Vance's eyes darkened. We've only seen a fraction of what's possible. The rift is far more than just an opening between worlds. It's a conduit, a direct line to something much larger than us. And what's worse, we don't know who or what is on the other side. Daniel knew this was the truth. They had closed the immediate threat, but the rift was still there. It was still pulsing, still active, and its presence had changed the very fabric of reality. What if this was just the beginning? What if humanity had unknowingly awakened something far worse than the invaders they had fought? We need to prepare, Daniel said, the weight of the situation pressing down on him. We need to understand the rift, its origins, and what it means for humanity. We can't afford to sit back and wait for the next wave. Vance nodded, his face resolute. I agree. We've seen the power it can bring, but we've also seen the destruction it leaves in its wake. If we don't understand it, if we don't control it, we risk everything. The others in the base gathered around, their faces a mix of exhaustion, fear, and determination. They were all that remained of the team that had survived the battle, and now their mission had evolved. It was no longer about fighting off an invasion. It was about learning, adapting, and finding a way to live in a world that had changed forever. You heard the man, one of the soldiers said, looking at Daniel with newfound respect. We fight now with our minds. We fight to understand, to control, to protect what's left. Daniel nodded, his voice growing stronger with each word. We're no longer just survivors. We're the last line of defense, and we are humanity's best hope. The rift is a call, a signal, and we must answer it. But we will answer it on our terms. We will no longer be passive. The time for hiding is over. There was a moment of silence as his words sank in. Then, one by one, each person in the room stood taller, their resolve hardening. They knew the road ahead would be difficult. They knew there would be dangers, perhaps even worse than what they had already faced. But they also knew that they had a choice, to stand and fight or to be swept away by forces they could not understand. For the first time in a long time, Daniel felt a flicker of hope. They had lost so much, but they had gained something far more valuable, a purpose. The world might have been fractured, but humanity's spirit had not been broken. The team began to make their plans, the atmosphere in the room buzzing with the energy of those who had been given a second chance. They would not sit idly by. They would not let the rift consume them or their world. They would learn its secrets, and they would use that knowledge to protect the future. Daniel looked out the window, staring at the rift in the distance. It was still there, still alive, still beckoning. But this time, it was not just a threat, it was a challenge, and humanity would rise to meet it. They had awakened, not just from the battle, but from the ignorance that had held them captive for so long. The rift was not the end, it was the beginning. And now, it was time for humanity to show the universe what they were truly capable of. For better or worse, the world had changed. But so had they, and they were ready. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed the story, please like, subscribe, and leave a comment. Your support means the world to us and helps us create even more exciting content. See you in the next adventure.